Welcome friends to At Home with Theosophy. This is our 5th class, and today we are going to continue our exploration of the mental plane, and we are going to focus more on the different vehicles of consciousness that are on the mental plane, the different bodies, if we want to call them like that, which if you see in the table that you have there, on the mental plane there are two bodies, the mental body and the causal body. As we are going to see, the causal body is the vehicle of consciousness of the soul, what we could call our soul. And the mental body is the expression of the soul at the level of thinking and the reason as we know it, and also in more transcendental ways. So that's what we are going to explore today. Let us start with a little recap of what we saw at the end of our previous meeting.
Mental Plane, Part 2. The three highest subdivisions of the mental plane are the habitat of the thinker himself. The vast majority live on the lowest level in various stages of evolution. A comparatively few of the highly intellectual dwell on the second level.
So remember that the mental plane is divided in two subdivisions. Each plane has 7 subplanes. So the lower 4 are part of the lower mental plane, or lower manas in Sanskrit. And the 3 higher subplanes are part of the higher mental plane. So the thinker is how Annie Besant calls this soul, and we discussed why she calls it the thinker. Is not thinking necessarily in the sense that we understand thinking, but in a far more transcendental way. What we call thinking here is a shadowy reflection of the quality of the thinker on its own plane. So what she says is that out of those 3 subplanes, which are different states of consciousness or levels of evolution, if you want to see it that way, most evolution, the soul of most people at this point in evolution is aware on the lowest of these 3 subplanes. Some people who are more intellectually bent, and by intellectual doesn't necessarily mean intelligent in memorizing information, but intellectual in the sense that these are souls that are trying to understand life, understand the world. Probably many of us. The soul dwells on the second subplane, that is a little higher than the previous case. And as we are going to see on the third subplane, the highest subplane on the mental plane, is the dwelling place of people who are on the path of discipleship.
At the stage now reached by the thinker, he is fully conscious of his surroundings and is in possession of the memory of his past. He knows the bodies he is wearing, through which he is contacting the lower planes, and he is able to influence and guide them to a great extent. He sees the difficulties, the obstacles they are approaching, the results of past careless living, and he sets himself to pour into them energies by which they may be better equipped for their task.
So this thinker, or sometimes it's called higher ego in the sense of I-ness, not like the psychological ego of modern spirituality. This thinker or higher ego, it is ourselves, but in a particular state of consciousness. Right now, for example, because we are working through the body and through the emotional body and through the mental body, through all these bodies, the possibilities of perception are limited by this, and we are limited also because of our lack of experience. Now, when the body goes to sleep, as we have seen previously, our consciousness is working through the astral body. In people to whom the emotions are not such a strong factor in their lives, even when we go to sleep, their consciousness is not stuck in identification with the emotional body or the astral body. These are synonyms. So consciousness may go to the mental body. And even in a few cases, in a person that is trying to go beyond the mental functioning in our daily life, if this is part of our spiritual practice, when the body is sleeping, consciousness may even become aware on the higher mental plane, which is the level of the soul. What Annie Besant says here is that at this level, most people at this point in evolution are aware. At this level, we remember past lives, we remember or we see the future actions or situations that are coming that were already created by karma. And from this level also, the consciousness tries to impress the brain, the physical human being. And according to the level of awakening of that particular person, that attempt by consciousness may be more or less effective.
His directions is sometimes felt in the lower consciousness as an imperiously compelling force that impels to a course of action for which all the reasons may not be clear to the dimmer vision of the lower consciousness. People who have done great deeds following a compelling inner power were acting as the real man.
Remember that Besant explained, she uses the word man as coming from the Sanskrit root man, that means the thinker, the manu. So consciousness, since consciousness is omnipresent, it can be working at the same time on all these different levels, because consciousness is really one. Now, we are self-conscious only on one particular level. So when we are self-aware of our thinking, for example, our thoughts and our emotions, still there is another aspect of our consciousness that we could call the higher manas, this thinker, the real thinker, that is trying to influence itself, himself, herself, in the consciousness on the physical plane. So, for example, sometimes we feel that we have to make a particular decision, and we may not know why. Our mind may invent some justification as to why we do something, but for all we know, we are choosing to do something that may be even detrimental for the personal self, but it's good for the general good, a greater good. So when we act impelled to do the right thing, this impulse doesn't come from our thinking process. It comes from a truer aspect of our consciousness, and that is impressed in our brain. In a similar way, when we act selfishly and we think that we are choosing to act selfishly, what we are doing is responding to a lower aspect of our being, what we call in Theosophy kama, which is the source of selfish or self-protective attitudes. So this is why I mentioned last week the question of free will is far more difficult to solve than or to approach than the simplistic view of whether we are a thinking entity choosing or not would suggest. So there are many influences coming into what we call our mind, and we may choose something but being actually impelled from another level of ourselves. So Annie Besant gives this example as how the higher consciousness, even if we don't know it, in a very clear way, is maybe constantly pushing us in a sense, or pushing itself to take a particular direction.
On the third level dwell the egos of the masters and of the initiates who are their chelas. From this world of subtlest mental forces, the masters carry on their beneficent work for humanity.
So the third level on the higher mental plane would be the highest, And that's where the causal body of the masters and the disciples dwelled. And this is why when we talk about the masters, we say, generally speaking, they don't go beyond the highest subplane of the mental plane. You may find the masters maybe very rarely on the mental plane itself, except for the highest level, or on the astral plane, and least of all acting on the physical plane. Although in the Theosophical view, of course, the masters have a physical body, live in a physical place, but their work is, for the most part, they work in meditation and on the inner planes, on the highest planes at the level of our highest principles. And from there, they pour influences that go through all the lower planes.
Every force there generated rays out in myriad directions, and the noblest, purest souls catch most readily these helpful influences. A discovery flashes into the mind of the patient searcher into nature's secrets. A new melody entrances the ear of the great musician. The answer to a long-studied problem illumes the intellect of a lofty philosopher. A new energy of hope and love suffuses the heart of an unwearied philanthropist.
So they are constantly pouring out inspiration to humanity for humanity to develop spiritual aspects in any particular activity. And those who are more receptive, they may receive that influence as in a way of insights or discoveries or inspirations, artistic inspirations or emotional inspiration. So that's part of the work that the adepts do for humanity. Of course, they do many other things, but normally the highest we can be receptive to, the closer we are to being a kind of channel of these energies, in the sense that when we can receive that inspiration, then out of that inspiration we may generate an action that everybody can profit from, a beautiful music or a great idea or a great act. So in that sense, people who are able to be inspired by the work of the masters are channels that bring that inspiration into actual actions that everybody else can also profit from.
The process of incarnation. The thinker, the individual human soul, when he is coming into incarnation, first radiates forth some of his energy and vibrations that attract around him and clothe him in matter drawn from the 4 lower subdivisions of his own mental plane.
So Annie Besant and Leadbeater used to talk about the soul as him. Blavatsky would talk more about the soul as it. And of course the soul has no gender. Gender is only real at the level of the physical body, and it's real only at this point in evolution. According to the Theosophical view, before and after this cycle or cycles of evolution, both male and female aspects are together in the same person. So, when she talks about his, or just take it as describing the soul, what she explains here is that the first motion, because the higher mental plane is the home of our soul. So when a person dies, the soul lets go of all the lower bodies and returns home, returns to the higher mental plane. When the process of incarnation begins, the first thing that happens is that the soul directs its attention outwardly to the lower planes, and that vibration begins to attract matter from the lower mental plane. That matter from the lower mental plane arranges itself around, so to say, the soul, and generates the mental body, as you see there on the table. That's how the mental body is generated.
Exactly according to the vibration sent out by the thinker will be the nature of the mental body that he thus draws around him. The finer kinds of mental matter answer the swifter vibrations and take form under their impulse. The coarser kinds similarly answer the slower ones.
So allegorically speaking, and any time that we use an example from the physical plane can be applied to the higher planes only allegorically and for one particular aspect of the question. But we could say if we would have to build our own clothing, we would be able to build a piece of cloth as good or as bad according to our skill. So how the quality of the mental body will also depend on the skill of the soul, and that skill of the soul is the result of this process of evolution. So as the soul awakens more and more, then the mental body that can be attracted around will be one that responds better to the nature of the soul.
None of his energies which are too subtle to move this matter can express themselves through it. He is therefore limited, conditioned or restricted by it in his expression of himself. It is the first of his prison houses during his incarnate life. While his energies are acting within it, he is largely shut off from his own higher world, for his attention is with the outgoing energies and his life is thrown with them into the mental body.
So there is only so much that the mental body can express of the soul. So there is an intrinsic limitation. No matter how good the mental body that the soul builds is, that itself sets a certain limitation. For example, if you want to paint, there is only so much, even if you are very skillful, there would be only so much that you can express through the painting. You could not express through the painting a whole philosophy where you would need words. You may convey a lot of philosophical aspects in a symbolic way through painting, but the medium of painting itself would limit how clear you can express your idea. So many of your ideas will be beyond what you can express with a painting. Now, in making the painting itself, you can be more or less skillful. So in the same way, in creating the mental body, the soul may be more or less skillful, but no matter how skillful the soul is, there is a whole aspect of what the soul is that is not possible to be expressed through the mental body. So that is part of a limitation that is intrinsic. And also, as the soul begins to work through the mental body, it gets identified with it. And begins to be confused, thinking that this awareness is the same as the mind, as the process of thinking, which is what happens in most people in humanity. We think that this process of thinking, this mind, this memory, these ideas, that is ourselves, and the mental body, which is the source of all these things, is different from what we really are. So that is part of the process of identification that we need to transcend little by little.
Also, his energies still pulsing outwards draw around him the coarser matter of the astral plane in his astral body. During his incarnate life, the lower kinds of mental matter are so readily responded to by astral matter that the two bodies are continually vibrating together and become very closely interwoven. The coarser the kinds of matter built into the mental body, the more intimate becomes the union, so that the two bodies are sometimes classed together and even taken as one, called kama manas.
So if you look at the table, we have at the level of higher manas the causal body, then we have the mental body. In the process of incarnation, going deeper into matter, the next body is the astral body, the body through which emotions are felt. So in the same way that the mental body was built, now the soul within the mental body pays attention or focuses on the emotional plane, the astral plane, and builds an emotional body. This emotional body, again, will be the result of the past experience of the soul and the past actions. And there is an affinity between the emotional body and the mental body, especially if the mental body contains the lower subplanes of it's made of matter that belongs to the lower subplanes of the mental plane. In those cases, the lower you go in the mental plane, the more in tune that matter is with the emotional matter. So many times emotions and thoughts, they work together, one stimulating the other. This is what in Theosophy sometimes called, as Annie Besant says, they are kama manas. Kama being part of the emotional plane and manas of the mental plane.
The mental body, according to the stage of evolution reached by the man, will be the type of mental body he forms on his way to become again incarnate. We may study, as we did with the astral body, the respective mental bodies of 3 types of people: an undeveloped person, an average person, and a spiritually developed person.
So Annie Besant doesn't go down all the way to the physical body in explaining the process of incarnation, because that is not the subject of this chapter. In a similar way, the soul will develop the etheric double and then the physical body. But she mentions the astral body just because many times it is, as we said, entangled with the mental body. So now she's going to explore how the mental body looks and functions in these 3 stages of evolution, like the very early, when at the beginning of humanity, then a more or less average stage, and then a later stage that is close to finishing the human experience. As you are going to see, when we saw this at the level of the astral body, the difference between the bodies was a little more noticeable. At the level of the mental body, because the mental matter is very subtle, the differences are not so evident as they were before. If you do know what the colors mean, and if you take into account that how brilliant, how shiny the colors are, it's a very important difference in the mental bodies, then you can begin to perceive the differences better. But at the level of shape and general structure, you probably won't see much difference. Anyway, I brought some images so we can see them.
The undeveloped person. His mental body is but little perceptible, a small amount of unorganized mental matter, chiefly from the lowest subdivisions of the plane. This is set vibrating feebly by the astral storms raised by the contacts with material objects through the sense organs. Except when stimulated by the astral vibrations, it remains almost quiescent, and even under their impulses, its responses are sluggish.
So as we explore with the astral body at the beginning of evolution, these inner bodies are quite negative in the sense that they are passive, and they begin to be awakened by the experience of the physical plane. So the soul at the very beginning of evolution, as we are going to see, is in a kind of sleepy state. Just as you see in a baby, that consciousness is kind of asleep, it's not really awakened and in touch with the environment. But it is through the interaction with the environment, the outward stimuli, that produces an emotional response and begins to make the astral or emotional body awake. And then the emotional activity generates some mental activity. So a primitive human being has a certain desire, and that desire will awaken in his mind the idea of how can I get that object of desire. At the beginning in a very feeble way, but as evolution goes on, the inner consciousness begins to be more and more awakened, and then many times at some point in evolution we don't even need an external stimulus to generate a desire. The mental activity of memory, for example, would awaken an emotional activity, which is the desire itself, and that will push the body to go get it, so get the object. So you can see how it begins by being stimulating from stimulated from the outside, and little by little the inner consciousness will be the source of action and not only the external.
The more violent the blows, the better for the progress of the man, for each responsive vibration aids in the embryonic development of the mental body. Riotous pleasure, anger, rage, pain, terror, all these passions, causing whirlwinds in the astral body, awaken faint vibrations in the mental, and gradually these vibrations, stirring into commencing activity, the mental consciousness.
So at the beginning of evolution, strong emotions are needed, and that's why human beings evolve in a relatively savage environment. Subtle emotions would not be strong enough to awaken the dormant mental activity. So at the beginning, all these feelings that for us at this point in evolution would be negative emotions, would be negative psychological responses, at that point they are not negative, they are necessary. Before we go on, let me show, I didn't mention anything about this, the image, but as you see, the mental body there is not very bright. See, the lower part is quite, the colors are pale and muddy, and this is the result of mental matter that is not active, that is not really organized. Then the other colors that you see there, although they have a certain pattern, are still very dull. And as you are going to see later, all these colors are brighter. And normally the mental activity manifests itself in colors as blue and yellow, which you don't see too much here.
The average person. His mental body is much increased in size, shows a certain amount of organization, and contains a fair proportion of matter drawn from the second, third, and fourth subdivisions of the mental plane.
So see that there are far more yellow there. Only on the borders you see matter that may be a little, muddier, but there is a beginning of this more brightness. And there will be, as you are going to see in the spiritually developed mental body, you will see that this is beginning to be more well organized. And the material, remember that the lowest subplanes of any plane are the denser kind of matter. In the first mental body, the primitive mental body, most of the matter is of the first or lowest subplane. Here, little by little, there is higher matter that begins to be part of this body.
Every vibration set up in the mental body causes changes in its constituents, throwing out of it, in the part affected, the matter that cannot vibrate sympathetically, and replacing it by suitable materials drawn from the practically illimitable store around. The more a series of vibrations is repeated, the more does the part affected by them increase in development.
So from a certain point of view, this is not too different from how our physical body works. When we eat, the matter that we are incorporating is assimilated, and some of the other matter will be let go, and that's how we grow. And depending on what kind of food we eat is the kind of body we have. In this case, the food is the mental activity. So if our thoughts are entangled with negative emotions, and the thoughts are always about concrete objects and not things that are more materialistic, that is the kind of mental body that we build for ourselves. If on the other hand we start turning our attention to higher things, then we begin to attract matter that is needed to express those higher interests, and that higher matter will push away the lower matter, because there is only so much matter that can be in the mental body. So this is a way in which the mental body changes in time.
The habit of quiet, sustained, and sequential thought directed to non-worldly subjects of meditation and study develops the mind-body and renders it a better instrument. The effort to cultivate abstract thinking is also useful, as this raises the lower mind towards the higher and draws into it the subtlest materials of the lower plane.
So, our daily life is constantly drawing our mind to very concrete things. And the matter that is needed to think about these things is the lowest matter of the mental plane. Sometimes people ask, why should we study things that are abstract? They study the laws of nature from a spiritual point of view, or some abstract subjects that you can find in theosophical literature, or try to conceive our true nature beyond thoughts, emotions, and body. And they may say, this is not practical. I need something practical. How is this going to help me in my life? But the very fact of paying attention to non-worldly subjects and to abstract thinking generates an evolution in your mind, which that mind you will use then to do your regular day, your regular business. You will be able to deal with life, with regular life, from a different point of view. So even though putting your mind in abstract aspects may not give you information that you may deem practical, the very fact of placing your attention on these subjects will produce a practical effect, a transformative effect in your mind. So this is one of the reasons why study is recommended. Of course, study, meditation, service, all these are different aspects of the spiritual life. None of those isolated will be the enough from if we want to put it that way. But this is one of the effects of the study of abstract subjects.
When a new study is commenced, or a change in favor of high morality is initiated, the early stages are found to be fraught with difficulties. Sometimes the effort is even abandoned because the obstacles in the way of its success appear to be insurmountable. At the beginning of every new mental undertaking, the whole automatism of the mental body opposes it. The materials habituated to vibrate in a particular way cannot accommodate themselves to the new impulses.
This again, I think is something that we can relate to because we see the same process on the physical plane. If you start a new diet, at the beginning is difficult. If you start a new exercise, after you go to do this exercise for the first time, all your body aches. Your body doesn't want to do it. It reacts, with pain. But because we have more or less some experience on the physical plane, we understand that the ache is part of the process. Now, something similar happens with the emotional and mental activity. When we start a new way of thinking, of looking at things, we will find it difficult. Our mind and emotions will say, why am I wasting time with this? How is this useful? And all these reactions are just like the pain that you feel in the body when you do a new exercise. These are only that at the mental level, it manifests in the way of ideas of frustration, and these ideas that I was talking about, or at the emotional plane, they will manifest as emotions. So we have to be aware of this because normally we identify with this. So we are upset, and it's not us that are upset. It's the emotional body because of the effort. And then if we listen to what the emotional body says, we abandon the effort. And then that means that we are still acting not by an inner determination, by our inner intelligence, but we are acting by the external world. In this case, our emotions is the external stimuli to our awareness that is, the innermost aspect of ourselves. So it's important to keep in mind that these processes take place also on the psychological level, not only on the physical.
The early stage consists chiefly of sending out thrills of force which are frustrated, so far as setting up vibrations in the mental body are concerned. which because of the necessary preliminary as they shake out of the body the old refractory materials and drawn into it the sympathetic kinds. During this process, the man is not conscious of any progress. He is conscious only of the frustration of his efforts and of the dull resistance he encounters.
This is true to anything we want to change in ourselves, be it physical or psychological again. So at the beginning, all the energy is spent not to produce a clear result, an evident result. The energy is used to begin to attract the kind of energy and inertia that will allow the building of something new. So there is always a lag time. There is always a process in which we have to make the effort without seeing any result. And the deeper the process, the longer can be that lag time. So this again, many people don't really grow because they work by fits. They start, they don't see results, they stop, and whatever effort they made is lost in the time that they are not making any effort, and then they start again, and of course the same result will be there. And so if we know how this works, then we can be confident and we can move in a certain direction, confident that that will happen eventually. All spiritual teachers say similar things in different ways. Fake it till you make it is a way of saying this. Just make the effort and eventually it will become a reality. But you have to make the effort. Try to live as if you are really perceiving this. First have the intention out there and then the results will follow.
If he persists, as the newly attracted material begin to function, he succeeds better in his attempts, and at last, when all the old materials are expelled and the new are working, he finds himself succeeding without an effort, and his object is accomplished. The critical time is during the first stage, but if he trust in the law, as sure in its working as every other law in nature, and persistently repeated his efforts, he must succeed. And a knowledge of this fact may cheer him when otherwise he would be sinking in despair.
So after you have experience in this, you are sure that this is like that. And even if you don't see any result, there is no doubt to you that you have to keep on going in the same direction, because sooner or later the result will come. The difficulty is when you don't have enough experience. And this is like the chicken and the egg thing, because experience allows you to get through the preliminary process. The lack of experience doesn't help you get through, and if you don't get through, you don't get experience. So unfortunately, nature has these kind of circles, or that can become vicious circles or virtuous circles, and our effort is needed to break the circles. Then once you overcome the inertia that is always there in matter, whether mental matter, emotional or physical, then things can be manifested in a spontaneous way, because consciousness itself doesn't need effort. Consciousness is as it is by itself. The problem is that as long as there is a resistance in the vehicles of consciousness, the effort is directed to reshape them. So, effort and spontaneity depend or are related far more to matter than to consciousness itself.
The spiritually developed man. From this body, all the coarser combinations have been eliminated, so that the objects of the senses no longer find in it materials that respond sympathetically to their vibrations. It contains only the finer combinations belonging to each of the 4 subdivisions of the lower mental world. The materials of the 3rd and 4th subplanes predominate in its composition, making it responsive to all the higher thoughts and emotions.
So if you see the image there is a clear yellow aspect, which is the part of the intellectuality, and then you have that in the upper mental body more bluish tones that are again intellectuality and spiritual aspiration. You see that there are no dull colors, They are brighter. They have muddy also tones. So the change in the mental body is more at the level of the quality of the colors than the shape and patterns that you see there, although there is a change in patterns too. And the body tends to have more material from the higher subplanes of the lower mental plane. And remember, we talked at some point that on each subplane there is also matter that is, let's say, magnetically purer or more or less pure. By pure, that I mean that has a tendency to respond to consciousness faster or slower. So as the mental body evolves, not only the bulk of matter is from the higher subplanes, but also even the matter from the lower subplanes have the more evolved or the more spiritual kind of matter of the lower subplanes.
Such a body is rapidly becoming ready to reproduce every impulse from the thinker, which is capable of expression on the lower subdivisions of the mental plane. It is growing into a perfect instrument for activities in this lower mental world.
So it begins to be more and more in tune with the soul and respond naturally to the presence of the soul there.
The causal body.
So now we are going to explore the vehicle of expression of the soul itself that is on the higher mental plane.
Let us now pass into the formless divisions of the mental plane, the region which is man's true home during the cycle of his reincarnations, into which he was born, a baby soul, an infant ego, an embryonic individuality, when he begins his purely human evolution. Formed of the matter of the three highest subdivisions of the mental plane, it is exquisitely fine, a film of rarest subtlety, even at its first inception. As it develops, it becomes a radiant object of supernal glory and beauty.
So both the emotional and mental bodies, they grow in size a little with evolution, but they are more or less always this kind of ovoid figure. In the case of the causal body, as we are going to see if we have time, the appearance of the causal body itself may greatly change, and also the size of the causal body changes very much with evolution. As Annie Besant says, they are at the very beginning this infant ego from the Greek ego, that means I-ness. So this infant sense of I-ness is still asleep, and with evolution it begins to awaken.
The technical name of this vehicle is causal body, because the ego gathers up within it the results of all the experiences, and these act as causes, molding future lives. It is the only permanent one among the bodies during incarnation, the mental, the astral, and physical bodies being reconstituted for each fresh life. As each perishes in turn, it hands on its harvest to the one above it, and thus all the harvests are finally stored in this permanent body.
So the causal body is permanent during the whole stage of human evolution. Eventually it's also discarded. But the mental, astral, etherical, and physical bodies, they are changed after every incarnation. So you could say that there is a mental body that is the particular expression of Pablo, and an astral body, and an etheric and physical body. And all that after death is gradually dissolved, and the essence of the experience of Pablo is retained and absorbed by the causal body. Then that causal body will generate the mental body of who will become Mary, and the astral body, and the etheric double, and the physical body, and then you have a new personality which is different from the previous personality. Now the causal body itself is the same, and that's what we really are. What we really are, I mean, we are something even beyond that, but relatively speaking, what we are is this pure sense of being this impersonal sense of being or transpersonal sense of being, that is the essence of Pablo, Mary, of the African person, the Indian, the American, in each different incarnation.
What is the thinker? He is the divine self, as already said, limited or individualized by this subtle body drawn from the materials of the formless region of the mental plane. This matter, drawn around a ray of the self, a living beam of the one light and the life of the universe, shuts off this ray from its source, so far as the external world is concerned, and closes it within a film shell of itself, and so makes it an individual. The life is the life of the Logos, but all the powers of that life are lying latent, concealed.
So she asks, what is this soul or this thinker? So she says, it is the divine self, let's say Atman there, but it is Atman when it is limited, and limited in the worlds of illusion, as Annie Besant says, they are as far as the external world is concerned. But it's a limited expression of the universal Atman, if you want to put it that way. So my personality and my sense of individuality is a limited expression of the one being, and your individuality is another limited expression of the one being, and so with each one of us. So the whole humanity, and in fact the whole universe, but let's say the whole humanity, are different experiences of this one being. And when we realize our one being, we realize that we are not this particular experience. We are the being, but we are the being looking at this particular experience. At the point of realization of the ultimate self, we as being the one self can also experience the universe through any other personality. And this is what the mystics experience, that they can, perceive through any one of us, even through animals, through plants or rocks. There is no limitation for consciousness at that point. But when expressing on the lower planes, that universal Atman expresses itself in a limited way as a particular person.
The eternal man, the individualized self, is the actor in every body that he wears. It is his presence that gives the feeling of I, alike to body and mind, and the I being that which is self-conscious and which by illusion identifies itself with that vehicle in which it is most actively energizing.
So in the Theosophical view, the body itself has a series of activities, but the body doesn't have a sense of I-ness. Our mind is a process of thinking, but the mind doesn't have a sense of I-ness in itself. Same with the emotions. For example, you have a computer. The computer can think. Any software is a kind of thinking process. You can make a computer play chess and beat the best of us. So the computer can think. But that computer doesn't have the sense, I am a computer. I am an individuality. Why? Because the self is not there. So the self, the manasic aspect of the self, Atman actually is there. Atman is the foundation of everything. But the sense of I-ness comes when Atman, the self, expresses itself through manas, through this mental principle. That's where the sense of I am comes from. So we think we are the thoughts just because we are identified with this thinking process, and we are shedding or we are conveying this sense of I-ness onto the thoughts. And we think we are this body because we are conveying our sense of I-ness onto the body. Yogis that can break this identification, they can pierce their body, and even though the body may feel the pain, they are separate from that pain because they are not identified with the body. In our case, because of our identification, we still think that the pain of the body is my pain. So this is an interesting phenomenon that happens with consciousness.
To the man of the senses, the I is the physical body and the desire nature. He draws from these his enjoyment, and he thinks of these as himself, for his life is in them. To the scholar, the I is the mind, for in its exercise lies his joy, and therein his life is concentrated. Few can rise to the abstract heights of spiritual philosophy and feel this eternal man as I, with memory ranging back over past lives and hopes ranging forward over future births.
So according to what's the main point of identification of consciousness is what a person feels more his I-ness, or where the person feels more his I-ness or her I-ness. So people who are very identified with the body, they feel they are the body, and then anything that is related to the body and the physical pleasure and the physical senses are what gives them a sense of being alive. So any person that is very identified with the body would look at philosophy and philosophizing as something terribly dull and useless, and why would you do that? When we get more identified with the mind, then that's where we get the sense of this is what I am, and then we play with ideas and we try to understand the world, and we may even deny many physical bodies, many physical pleasures, because we are not so interested in that level of the experience. But then of course we can even go beyond the ideas, beyond the emotions, beyond the body, and we can even become self-aware on this level where the knowledge of the past and future exists.
Human evolution. Human evolution is the evolution of the thinker. At first, as little conscious as a baby's earthly body, he almost slept through life after life, till the experiences playing on him from without awakened some of his latent forces into activity. Gradually, he assumed more and more part in the direction of his life, until, with manhood reached, he took his life into his own hands and an ever-increasing control over his future destiny.
So when we talk about evolution, we are basically talking about, of course, according to Blavatsky, there are 3 levels of evolution, and that is a little complex, but basically when we talk about human evolution, as Annie Besant says there, it's the evolution of the mental aspect. Why? Because Atman is the ultimate reality itself. It doesn't evolve. Atman is aware from the very beginning, but when that Atman is expressing itself through the lower principles, that awareness is somehow covered, or not so much covered. The awareness is always there, but there is a loss of self-awareness, or perhaps the whole process of evolution has as a purpose to generate self-awareness, that is, an awareness of the awareness itself. So the question is not a question with Atman itself. The question is with the experience of Atman through a mind, emotions, and a body. The more this Atman, this ultimate subject, and even beyond subject originally, but it expresses in ourselves as the ultimate subject, the more this ultimate subject can relate to the world in a self-aware way, the more we would say that the person is evolving. So changes are mainly at the level of the lower planes, and in particular with human beings, it depends on the evolution of the soul on the higher mental plane.
For the growth of the causal body itself is very slow, for it can vibrate only in answer to impulses that can be expressed in the very subtle matter of which it is composed, thus weaving them into the texture of its being. Hence the passions, which play so large a part in the early stages of human evolution, cannot directly affect its growth.
So we've seen how the emotional and mental bodies grow by external stimulation. At the beginning, very strong emotions, very strong physical happenings generate emotions, very strong emotions generate a mental activity, and this is how all these bodies little by little evolve. The causal body is too subtle and beyond all this. Only what we would call spiritual aspirations, high morality, the desire to understand, to know our true self, these things can really make the causal body grow. Or feelings of love, feelings of or actions of self-sacrifice, all these things are the ones that can reach the causal body. So since at the beginning of evolution, these activities are not very prominent, the causal body evolves very slowly. And as we get closer and closer to the last stages of evolution, then the causal body evolves in a very rapid way, because more and more of the daily activity of consciousness has to do with all this, with doing the right thing, with love, with compassion, with helping, with understanding, with discovering our true self. All these activities are the ones that make the causal body grow and become a better vehicle of the inner Atman. So the more these activities take place in our awareness, the more food is there for the causal body, allegorically speaking.
The experiences that can be reproduced in the causal body belong to the mental region, highly intellectual or loftily moral in their character. Otherwise, its subtle matter can give no sympathetic vibration in answer. A very little reflection will convince anyone how little material suitable for the growth of this lofty body a person affords by his daily life. Hence the slowness of evolution, the little progress made.
So yeah, that's what I just explained.
As the thinker develops, he becomes more and more conscious of his own inherent powers and also of the workings of his energies on the lower planes, of the bodies which those energies have drawn around him. He at last begins to try to influence them. These impressions we call conscience, when they deal with morals, and flashes of intuition when they enlighten the intellect. When these impressions are continuous enough to be normal, we speak of their aggregate as genius.
So this is how the higher consciousness begins to manifest on our physical plane. This sense of what is the right way to deal with something, what is our duty, but not what is our duty as a moral weight, but the sense of this is what I should do, this is my responsibility, this is how I add to the common goodness. All these things are within the field of what we call conscience. The warnings against taking a wrong, or doing a wrong action or making a wrong decision. These are all the results of the higher influence on our brain, on our personality. And then the flashes of intuitions, this sense of what we should do, or how we can proceed, or how things are, or what our true nature is. All these flashes of intuition are also part of our higher consciousness. So the more our awareness awakens and unfolds, and the more the vehicles of consciousness are brought into tune, to be in tune with this awareness, the more these flashes become common. And when they become common, it's all these, people, they use this word genius in the 19th century and early 20th century in a little more general sense. Anybody that would succeed in their field, in some way or the other, they would say that this is a manifestation of the genius that was in people, the possibility of. So especially when it comes to moral and spiritual aspects, or artistic aspects, or philosophical, they are frequently the expression of the higher consciousness. So here we have an image, a series of images of the causal body. In an undeveloped person, the causal body is pretty much like a bubble. not with no particular colors, quite passive, then if you see that in the average person, there is not too much of a difference with the previous one. The bubble is a little more, seems to be more receptive. You see it a little clearer, maybe a little, thinner in a certain way. But as the person begins to develop, the colors begins to be arranged there, and you can see that there is some kind of radiation from the causal body. And this is how some clairvoyants, Annie Besant and Leadbeater, have seen the causal body of an enlightened being in the Theosophical way of talking about this. We would say master of wisdom. So you can see how there is this radiation. The body itself may cover, even many yards. And this is just for you to get an idea of the evolution of the causal body itself. So this is what I have to present tonight. Next week, which is our last week, we are going to talk about the higher two planes, the Nirvanic and the Buddhic. There is not so much to say as with the lower planes, because the higher we go, the more these planes are beyond words, and also the simpler they are from a certain point of view. But we are going to explore that. Before we close, is there any question or comments about what we have been discussing? In the one part of the book, while Jeremy types there, Annie Besant talking about the Atman, the spiritual self, she said the spiritual self on its own plane is always aware. And then when the spiritual self has to express itself through different vehicles of consciousness, and you get to the physical plane, that spiritual self is completely overwhelmed by matter. But then in the course of evolution, through the experience that the spiritual self acquires, and also through the reshaping of all these vehicles, then that matter that was overwhelming the real self becomes really a vehicle of expression of it. The vehicle is always limiting, but when it begins to respond to what the spiritual self, to the nature of the spiritual self, then it begins to be useful in the sense of, being really a form of expression of the self.
Jeremy asks, he thanks you for your lecture, and then asks, did the Christ go through the same evolution?
In the Theosophical view, he did. The Christ would be at the level of what it says here, a master of wisdom. The idea is that every human being goes through a process of evolution. Some human beings have been are already at the end of the process of evolution. Some others are quite, in early stages. And the reason why there are different stages, there are many reasons. Souls begin to evolve already with different levels of maturity. It's not that every soul is created anew for this cycle of evolution and then we all start together. So yes, the idea is that the Christ underwent this process of evolution. If you listen again to, because I know this is a lot of material all at once if you are not familiar with this information, but if you listen to the recordings, try to stop and think about all these things. As Annie Besant said many times, and she mentions something in passing here, what makes our mental body grow, and also our causal body, is the reflection, the thinking, and not thinking only about concepts, but the pondering over, the trying to perceive, not simply accumulating information. So if we were in a class where we have more time, we would stop after every slide and discuss it. So you can do it by yourself. I'm always available on my email to answer questions if you need it. But try to be active in your study of this material, and that will really provide more insight.